in terms of working with the EPA and the Department of Energy, and working with the state of Illinois and green banks to be able to filter those benefits down to the communities as they prescribed. They were very open and very sharing in today's plenary. I cannot express to you how important that is. Over the next 14 months, there's going to be so much money flowing into the economy that it's going to shift the economy. It's going to change, right? We're going to go through a massive change. The last time this much money got pushed into the economy was during COVID, right? Where literally billions of dollars just flowed. Another billions of dollars are going to flow, but it's going to be here to support climate infrastructure, being able to develop and build programs to support the next generation economy. But there's also programs in place to help not only homeowners, but also condominium associations, for example, for generating and putting in place EV electric charging stations into their units, for example. All that capital is available. And the question is how does that capital move between the Department of Energy and the EPA to get into the benefits of businesses and communities so that they can thrive and grow? I can tell you very, 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 very expressly, there is a very, 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 very strong push to ensure that much of this money ends up in the hands of BIPOC and women-owned businesses and communities and rural communities to help lift all of these areas, both inner city as well as rural, so that none of these folks are left behind in the next generation as it relates to the green economy and the direction that we're going. So that is critical. The numbers that they expressed, for example, as it relates to the STR programs, I don't know how many of you are business owners, I don't know how many of you are representing corporations, small businesses, and the like. So it's very broad in terms of what this opportunity is, in terms of receiving this type of capital. I don't want to call it a windfall. I jokingly refer to it as I read the act, and when I read how the purpose of how they would like this money to flow from the federal level to the state level was, there's this concept within our Black community of reparations. This is about as close to reparations as I think we're going to see. Literally, $27 billion flowing for women, BIPOC, urban communities, rural communities, opportunity to catch up and tie in. So they're giving out billions of dollars, and less than 2% of those dollars are ending up in the hands of women and or BIPOC folks. We need to change that. How does that change? Well, part of it comes with education and training, which is part of what this is. So please, ask all the questions that you can. I'll do my best to answer them. But high level and very simply, as I was saying a little bit earlier before we started, green banks, one way to think of the green bank, at least from the state of Illinois' perspective, and its interaction with the federal government, is a financial utility. So we discussed the concept of water utilities, electrical and power utilities. In many respects, this is a financial utility. Part of the program as it relates to this is figuring out and working with the broader communities to make sure that these benefits are getting into the hands of those folks that need it the most. Normally, this is a very red tape driven program, and it's even going to be a little bit challenging working with most green banks because many of these things are new as you're defining credit, how repayments will occur. So within financing, so to speak, in the green bank, you still have to finance against credit. You still have to have a strong business case, just as they mentioned on stage. Financials, the modeling, explaining how the benefits are going to work, explaining how there's going to be a benefit to the climate or benefit to society, etc., for how this money is organized. But part of Green Bank's opportunity is to help cut through some of that red tape, because everybody doesn't know a PhD, as she mentioned, to be able to go directly to the Department of Energy. But there will be some programs where you can go to green banks so that they have already done the red tape cutting, if you will. So we reduce the red tape to try to get it as little as you can, to the point where you're now interacting directly with the green bank, and some of these larger programs are able to then flow through. As it relates to that, there are many different financing vehicles and programs underneath the various federal acts that were recently passed, and the Bill Act and the Inflation Recovery Act. As you mentioned, there's electrical vehicles, there's opportunities in there to work to build trades and help build workforce development as well. There's many opportunities in there to work within BIPOC communities very specifically around equitable access, and that work also comes with grants as well as financing opportunities and mechanisms. These can drive down to the personal level. We're working with local banks and community banks and CCRAs to help them work within the community so that people have, for example, gas-fired stoves or natural gas furnaces, that they can convert those to electric so they're not being left out of the economy, getting cleaner air in their homes so they're not burning natural gas inside their house. Things along those lines. So the way that these programs are set up, green banks help create the distribution of those financial products into the community, either through direct lending, through creating equity investment vehicles like venture capital funds, for example, to co-invest alongside the Department of Energy in their STRR and their SBIR programs. If you recall, those programs for the Department of Energy, if you have an idea, they will fund you $250,000, and then you go through various phases. At some point, some of these opportunities from that free money that's available from the Department of Energy, green banks can also then co-invest. So as that opportunity develops merit, as you're able to build your relationship with the Department of Energy and you're able to show scalability, you need additional following capital. Green banks also can provide funding to support early stage ventures that have been supported by the Department of Energy. So that helps de-risk the overall program, but it also helps build businesses and increase knowledge and awareness. So largely green banks, the name in and of itself makes it really no different from any other financing bank. The difference is focus and expertise and knowledge. So typically the green banks, we understand climate finance related issues, renewable energy, all the items that fall within the bailiwick of climate, infrastructure, and change. But the specialty of the climate bank is to work not only with the capital markets to help facilitate bringing in financing into these vehicles, but also working with the federal government to help make sure that that capital that's coming from the federal government gets deployed in a very equitable and resilient and quick manner into the markets. So I'll pause there for a second and open it up for questions. And we're a small group, we have a lot of time. I don't know who wants to know what, but I literally can talk for hours. So if there's any questions, feel free.
Yeah.
So I have a question. The Green Bank or the Climate Bank, you guys work with the private sector as well? So for example, if you needed funding for equipment or machinery or something along that line that is directly related, for example, I work with an entity and we have a machine that basically takes in municipal solid waste, garbage, tires, plastic on the front end, and on the back end it kicks out electricity. It does that with no carbon footprint. So under the infrastructure bill, it kind of falls under carbon capture.
Mm-hmm.
So would that be something that if we were partnered with a municipality, that we could come to you guys and either have the municipality issue bonds and you guys loan against the bonds, or a private equity fund or something like that to raise the capital in order to do something like that? Because it would really solve a couple of problems. One, the problem with waste, medical and municipal, as well as to help to provide the electricity that can be sold back to the grid, or the municipality can use that electricity to power municipal buildings, that sort of thing. Is that something that you guys could fund, something along those lines?
Those are the types of things that we are looking to fund, yes, very specifically. So where that could be broken out into different places for others that may have similar type opportunities is that within the Bill Act, there's very specific requirements to try to work with to provide machinery, equipment, lease financing.
Yep.
Right, especially for installers. They may have won a large contract, but they're waiting for, it's an account receivable, which financing for installers, to help them cover that, working capital as well, working capital lending to organizations. These are all mechanisms that are in place to be able to provide that financing. Very specifically, working with municipalities. Yes, municipalities can come directly to the state and be able to draw or borrow at favorable rates to support these types of activities very specifically.
Is there a cap on the amount of funding you can give for something like that? Because I think the price tag on these machines is anywhere between 25 and 50 million, depending on the size.
Yeah, no, so that goes back to business wherewithal, if you will,
Okay.
right? So equipment costs are equipment costs. The real question comes down to operating the business, making sure you're able to repay that. So there's still a standard credit
Yeah, sure.
underwriting perspective. So if you can afford a $10 million machine, we just are able to provide more effective cost of capital
Okay.
compared to a commercial bank or a commercial lender.
And the process for that, there's probably some to go more depth offline, but is it a long process to go through for the application, to try and get that, structure the financing, that sort of thing? You know, how complicated is it?
Yeah, no, so in terms of the complication, for the Illinois Climate Bank, their website, which that's one thing that we can't put on the screen, I can put that up. The Illinois Climate Bank does have several existing programs right now to support them. The application process is online, very straightforward. The requirements for the funding activity and the types of funding that can be done are listed there. And then there are private companies that also provide machinery, equipment, lease financing, if you will. Now, this isn't necessarily climate related. This is a traditional industry that has very long legs. So if you think about, any type of machinery, equipment, lease financing companies, there are many of those available. What the Climate Bank will focus on is providing this type of funding specifically for companies that are focused in this industry space.
Right, and that's what we would be, so that's.
Right,
Yeah.
and that's the benefit.
Now, I know you said you did Illinois, but is this, the green banks, are they national, or is it just, I know you
Yeah.
just work in Illinois, but is the whole banking system that you guys are putting in place and creating, is that gonna have a national footprint? So if we wanted to replicate the same model we're talking about in other states around the country, is that a resource there
no.
for that, or?
No, good question. So in that regard, there are many companies that do this. So my company is actually called Unplugged Capital. We're a merchant bank. Within my merchant banking company, I have a regulated arm called Regiment Securities. So Regiment Securities is a traditional broker-dealer, investment bank securities firm,
Okay.
and we work with governments globally. So the work that I do with my firm professionally is we also do the same work that I described with the state of Illinois. We also do this with other states, Louisiana, Florida, North Dakota, throughout the U.S., and also international. So my expertise is not only domestic, but the same work that we're discussing, I also do with the World Bank. So internationally, the work that we do is with the World Bank, which gives us global perspective. We also work very closely with the African Development Bank, which focuses on the continent of Africa. We work very closely with the Inter-American Development Bank. So these processes and these financial structures, and again, back to financial utilities, there are many flavors of green banks.
Mm-hmm.
I represent one from a corporate perspective in terms of what I do with my corporate clients, with folks like you in the room. And then there's also the work that we do, and we have the opportunities at the sovereign level with the state of Illinois and their climate bank. So depending on where you are globally, there are many different green bank opportunities where there's folks that focus on this to help provide capital to firms like yours that are looking to expand and grow, whether domestically or internationally. So international green climate banks, for example, I'll pick one that we work very closely with, is the African Finance Corporation. So they're the idea of bringing on electrification, water throughout the emerging, developing markets in Africa or Latin America. What's interesting is that it doesn't matter where you are on the planet, right? Water is water is water. Power is power is power. Solar is solar. The sun shines on the planet. So the underlying technology, is kind of unchanged. So what we focus on in terms of green banks and green banking is just like water is water is water, credit is credit is credit. So the business has to be solid, with a solid business plan, a solid growth plan. And then there's green banks that then specialize in financing this specific area. So there's some banks that, for example, that just focus on the automotive industry, right? Very niche. Green banks are just very niche financial institutions that understand climate and climate-related finance. Is that helpful for a definition?
Thanks, appreciate it.
No, perfect. Good question. Any other questions? Yeah.
My lens is working with community organizations, not even nonprofits, but really just grassroots organizations, right? Churches, those who want or who need access to capital so that they can expand their solar access, just thinking about people who are in impoverished neighborhoods who don't have ability to write business plans, et cetera. How do green banks go into those communities and help them also to sustain their ideas, whether it be through creating recycling events or whatever the case may be, but outside of the realm of big business or even smaller business, how do you all go into communities and empower people, especially in grassroots organizations, to take hold of the resources out there so that we can all have access to them?
Yeah, no, very good question. I'm going to take your question just slightly higher to keep it plugged into this morning's session, right? So $27 billion is being made available at the federal government level. And we had two very senior folks from the federal government imploring us to address your question and figure out how to take advantage of that. So part of what we're doing right now is making sure that we're building in the infrastructure to help address the questions that you mentioned. And how we do that right now, the plan is by working with the Urban League. Okay. So the Urban League becomes the catalyst to reaching the community, especially churches, and deep within our communities. And the opportunity, the city of Chicago and the Chicago Urban League is cutting edge. Cutting edge. We are perhaps, through the Chicago Urban League, really ahead of the National Urban League when it comes to this. And fundamentally, because of the point that you raised. So the Department of Energy is going to help provide money to the state of Illinois. The state of Illinois then is going to partner with the Chicago Urban League to help create education centers, to help train up the community and the community organizing efforts and become a point of contact to help facilitate that flow into the Black community specifically by working with churches. So that way the leadership of the churches and the people who own homes in the community who are trying to figure out how to get access to this. Our goal is to make the Urban League a center of excellence and a knowledge base for the community and the community benefits very specifically. Right? Otherwise, there's a massive gap. But you need to be able to have trusted community advisors and sources that are beyond reproach, that have proven through the years that they are here for the community, that they are embedded into the community and helping them grow, because that's what we need. The Chicago Urban League definitely does that. Yeah. So I don't know how many of you are Chicago Urban League or have gone through the impact program or if you're familiar with the impact program. If you're not, I highly encourage you to look into it. But that's another example of being able to expand the reach and get to a multiplier effect. Yes.
Hi. Oh, sorry. Hi, my name is Yami. I work with Elevate, based out of Chicago. And my question is to piggyback off of what you were just saying. You were talking about working with the Urban League Chicago area. The state of Illinois is about to get a huge influx from the state level
Correct.
of funding around green and equitable jobs. Are there other partners throughout the state that you all are working with to help bring resources to them?
Yes, we are. And so very specifically, I apologize that the name just escaped me, but I'll get the name to you. There's a nonprofit organization that we're working with that's being anchored by the Chicago Urban League to help expand these benefits throughout the state of Illinois. So in the state of Illinois, we have very rural areas like Quincy, west. They call that part of the state no man's land. Literally, there's no highways that go through there. It's all back roads. From Springfield to the Mississippi River, literally there's nothing there. Right? Very small communities, co-ops, the folks that need the same help. Right? So there's a larger nonprofit group that has received funding to make sure that this is also applicable, not just for rural, but also for urban and the others. The urban anchor here in Chicago is the Urban League, given their stature. There are others, for sure, but Urban League is one of our primary partners in that. But part of that is just to make sure that we're able to help get these benefits to also the rural parts of the state as well, downstate Illinois. There's other areas, kind of East St. Louis, if you think about, some of those underserved communities. You get down further state to Cairo or Shawneetown, Mount Vernon, if you're familiar with these parts of the state of Illinois. Same issues. So part of what the Illinois Climate Bank and the Illinois Finance Authority does is help create, access to these spaces. Chris Meiser just walked in. Chris, can you remind me the name of the nonprofit?
Yes, well, we expect to have there will be several applications, but it is, Chris Meister, I'm the Executive Director of the Illinois Finance Authority, which was named in state law as the Illinois Climate Bank. The group that we've been most active with is the Coalition for Green Capital. It's led by a veteran of the Clinton administration, Reed Hunt, who was, I think, primarily responsible for the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund being put in the Inflation Reduction Act. On April the 19th, US EPA has its own special website for Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, so it's easily accessible. We also have links on our website under Climate Bank, the Illinois Finance Authority. There was 50 pages of guidance released on April the 19th. There is an open docket for comments with the US EPA, and we've got another wealth of materials. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Your timing was perfect. So are there any other questions as it relates to more broadly how the interaction of green banks work, the federal funding, the Illinois Climate Bank, and opportunities there? Yes.
Could you just describe a little bit of the history of how long the Climate Bank has been around in Illinois, maybe even across the country, and like kind of the scale at which they're working right now? Because this is honestly all new to me, so I'd like the general big picture background of how long this has been around.
Sure. Without the exact dates, but directionally, the Illinois Finance Authority was established in the early 2000s by the amalgamation of basically 7 different state agencies that all perform different financing aspects. So again, as I described the Illinois Finance Authority as a financial utility, so the state had a number of these different programs. There's a housing authority, there were ambulance and fire trucks to work with municipalities, for the person who asked the municipality question earlier. So in a moment of brilliance and quite honestly, sobriety, the state was brilliant and combined these 7 entities into one and greatly expanded their authority as it relates to financing activities. When this organization was created, it was also created during a time where there was another strong push around climate, energy, renewal. The state of Illinois has a lot of coal, so there was a conscious effort there and a conscious effort around building wind and solar and other renewable resources. So the act itself for the Illinois Finance Authority has been around for a while. It is primarily a conduit issuer for organizations in the state of Illinois. So corporations that are looking for tax benefits because they are working on renewable energies or programs that meet the requirements of the state for a benefit, they're able to then come to the state of Illinois or issue through the state of Illinois to be able to access the capital markets in that way to secure funding for their businesses. So roughly 3 years ago, the Illinois Finance Authority changed its focus and expanded it beyond the core business, but to then also include climate and climate-related activities. So recently, the name of the Illinois Finance Authority has officially been changed to the Illinois Climate Bank to really focus on kind of these activities. One of the other aspects that the Illinois Finance Authority, the Illinois Climate Bank does is it helps lead and finance the majority of water infrastructure in the state of Illinois. With the IEPA for clean water and drinking water or wastewater renewal, stormwater and the like, which is how most of our water infrastructure is financed in the state. So it's really expanding that. Last year, the Climate Bank issued just north of $250 million of climate-related finance in the state of Illinois. As you heard Shalai say earlier, the federal government's involvement is really, for the most part, between the federal government and the state is where most of that money is going to flow. And then there are avenues and opportunities for individuals to go directly to the Department of Energy or EPA to receive direct funding. So for the majority of the funding that will come through the state, one of the things that's very interesting is that the state of Illinois is really at the forefront and at the front edge of working with the EPA and the Department of Energy for making sure that those benefits move efficiently here in the state. So in that regard, the state and the Climate Bank is actively working with the federal government to increase its resources and its allocation of funding through the various Bill Act and the Inflation Recovery Act that we were discussing earlier. That capital will then come over to the Illinois Climate Bank, which then the Illinois Climate Bank will work with partners like Chris mentioned, as well as the Urban League, to try to get these benefits all the way down to the church level and to the parishioner level to help them put solar power onto their roofs, and then work with installers to help make sure that they have the capital resources to install the solar panels, for example, on those. So it's a very collective and cohesive, kind of strategy. I think today's great for you all to witness it because you have literally all the pieces working together. It's not perfect in terms of how all these pieces are coming together because as you heard this morning, it's moving very, very, very quickly. Very quickly. But I'm very proud of the work that the Department of Energy is doing, the Urban League and the state of Illinois to really put that piping in place to be able to get these benefits in and out, as well as be able to get, kind of these important informational sessions out there so that you guys know how to be able to get some of these benefits. Yes?
Right now, there's a huge inequity in lead lines, especially in Chicago, and there are citywide efforts to have all lead pipes replaced, but we know that there lacks both financing and workers to do that. What is the Green Bank's strategy right now to hopefully finance municipalities like Chicago to make sure we have clean water?
I'm going to let Chris take that answer. You want
Can I join you?
Come on up. So Chris Meister is the executive director who runs the Climate Bank. I'm just his executioner. I help him figure out how to get it done.
Thank you, great question, and I know that we've got the former mayor of Flint who's also on the agenda today. I happen to have grown up in Flint. fund, so I was familiar with that issue. So this is something that at the Finance Authority we've been working on for a long time. In spring of last year, I wrapped up 6 years on the US EPA Environmental Financial Advisory Board, and several years ago we put together one of the early big documents on lead pipe. So it's something that we're deeply aware of. I think there are three answers to your question. Number one, starting back in 2013 through our partners at the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency under the state revolving fund, the city of Chicago, for the first time ever, started using the loans from the state EPA that were sourced ultimately from the federal government for water projects. So that was number one, because for a number of decades since the creation of the program, the city, for whatever reason, had not used those low-cost loans. And then, as Larry said, he was on the board when this happened. We're very proud because we dramatically increased the capacity statewide for these low-cost loans up to $1.8 billion, and the city was participating in part of that. Number two, through the bipartisan infrastructure bill and through the Inflation Reduction Act, there is a large amount of federal funds that are flowing through these state revolving funds and then ultimately going to municipalities and other local public entities to address this problem. Because at the end of the day, the municipalities and the other public entities are closest to the customers and closest to the problem. It's in essence their project. So a lot of that funding is already flowing. We don't have direct visibility because that's originated at state EPA, but I know that it is happening. And then the third element of this, and again, this is one of the reasons why the CJIP bill that the governor exercised such leadership on, the Climate Equity and Jobs Act, it fits in like it fits in hand in glove with all of these federal resources that came after CJIP becoming law in September of 21. And among those elements are the various focus on BIPOC contractors in the state CJIP, which also matches the Justice 40 priorities and disadvantage priorities. So that's a long way of saying is that the resources are there, they are being deployed. The Finance Authority, one of the things that we're actively doing right now is partnering with the various agencies to apply for these available federal funds, some of which we anticipate are going to be used for working capital loans for BIPOC contractors in the climate space, solar, water, others. Was that helpful? Also, I think there was another question earlier about climate banks or green banks, where they came from and why Illinois is different. The most well-known is the Connecticut Green Bank, although I work with Brian Garcia, and he's the president of CEO of the Connecticut Green Bank, along with the leaders of a lot of these other green banks. But again, Reed Hunt, who I mentioned before, he's been working in this for about 10 or 15 years, and this has been, there have been various versions of this. There's the Connecticut Green Bank, there's the New York Green Bank, there's also the DC Green Bank. And I think the common thread is that these organizations were seeded by ratepayer dollars, utility ratepayer dollars that were approved by their various public service commissions. In Illinois, we took a little bit of a different approach because, as Larry noted, we're already active in this capital market space, issuing bonds for water projects, the state revolving fund, nonprofit hospitals, nonprofit colleges, and other sort of ancillary loan products like the fire trucks and ambulances. We already had a base, a balance sheet, government structure, operating history. So when the opportunity for the Finance Authority to be formally designated in state law and policy as the climate bank, we were very grateful to the governor and the General Assembly. But it is a different path. I think for all of you that are here interested in this, I think because of course, funding an organization based solely on ratepayer dollars or additional charges, that has certain drawbacks. And indeed, I think one of the reasons why Connecticut moved so dramatically into this space was because their General Assembly swept some of their funds. Hard to operate a sustainable public finance organization when you have $100 one day and the next day the General Assembly says that you have 80. That's somewhat challenging. But I think with the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund and these other layered federal resources, which I will underscore to all of you, there is an intentionality and intelligence in this design of this alphabet and number soup, is that these sources of funding really layer on each other to solve these problems. It's not just random. And as we move forward with the development and scaling of greener climate banks across the country, I would predict that the products are going to move closer together, much like Larry and I experienced in the world of tax-exempt conduit bonds or the state revolving fund, and that you'll have simplified, standardized products. The goal of the federal administration, of the Biden administration, is, and I think this is consistent in their messaging, and if you heard Shalea earlier today, the goal is a set of financing tools that ordinary people can use in a predictable and reduced interest rate way so that they can affordably buy all of the things that everybody is going to need for this climate-free future. The solar panels, the cars, the heat pumps, whatever it is. And again, the technology is going to change. So in the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, there's $7 billion that is identified for solar for all. It's competitive, but in Illinois, it happens to match what our state program aimed at low-income people are for solar panels, solar for all. So the US EPA adopted it. I think that's a good sign about where we are. I think, yeah. But then there are also two other pots, the fund and the accelerator, that I think in different ways are going to be used to seed and build capacity in financial entities, whether they're organizations like ours or organizations like CDFIs, that's sort of the broad thrust. Was that helpful?
I don't think that was my question.
Yeah. Well, did I answer your question about on the lead pipes?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so I had a question, as it relates to the entire green energy space, because it's such a new industry, in one of the provisions, for example, in the infrastructure bill says that every 50 miles on the interstate, they have to have an EV charging station. So if we wanted to create a business that's a new entity to come in and go after some of those projects, is that something that you guys could possibly fund as a startup, or are you only looking at, because it's so new, the businesses just aren't there yet?
That's a great question. Again, we're gonna give credit to the governor and his leadership. In CEJA, when we were designated as the climate bank, we did not, because we already had an operating model and investments and a balance sheet and things of that nature. But we had a couple of very important clarifications in our statute. Number one, we were allowed for the first time to do joint ventures. And that was also consistent with some other provisions through our sister agency, the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, in something that is only now being stood up, the Climate Primes program. So we recognized that this would be a problem, so there was this ability to have joint ventures, hopefully with new startup organizations, and then also offer, hopefully in conjunction with private capital, working capital. So the policy framework is there, particularly with the focus on new entrants and making sure that the ownership and the workforce reflect the diversity of the state and the country. The elements are there in our law since September of 21, and what we are now doing is actively pursuing what Larry and I call the alphabet and number soup of all these federal opportunities. So in short, the powers are there, the funding broadly has been identified, and we are pursuing the funding. Was that helpful?
Yeah, but just a follow-up question to that. So basically, if I'm hearing you correctly, you guys would look at something like that as more of a joint venture as opposed to coming in as a debt financer to provide the operation and working capital for the business to get off the ground?
We knew that all tools would be necessary, and we wanted to have that option.
I would describe it back to the financial utility model.
Okay.
So the tools that we have at our disposal, as we can do a JV, that's one mechanism. The other is that we could provide financing, debt equity. Also within the group, and for example, in this area very specifically, we've been talking with community groups, not at the state level, but on my business side, with like organizations like the Urban League, who have identified, who are creating like a venture capital program to identify early entrants into the market, to either provide them capitalization for working capital needs, for machinery, equipment, lease financing requirements, also for investment, equity or debt to support their businesses. So within the broader statute of the Illinois Climate Bank, the Illinois Climate Bank in its authorization also has the ability to participate in these funds as a mechanism to support some of that growth. So it provides a lot of different flexibility. So the Climate Bank really is a utility that has the ability to support climate-related financing activities at basically all levels of business growth. I think that some of the important things there, though, like if there's things that lean one way or the other, is that what is important to the Climate Bank is also about workforce development, right? Building out these aspects. So while we are banking, we'd be able to come in, the decision-making criteria for who a JV partner with, what type of financing, who receives the financing, those decisions are still, as I said before, business decisions are still business decisions. But the Illinois Finance Authority and the Climate Bank has the ability to support its mission-related investment decisions. And as Chris said, the money's been identified, now the state is working to bring that money internally within the state to then develop the programs with the partners to start to then distribute those to folks that need capital support because they want to expand into the new markets of EV charging station development and deployment.
So how long do you guys anticipate before those funds are actually ready to be put on the street, or are they there now?
I can assure you they are not here now. The largest pot of money, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, has, the notice of funding is probably not going to come out until June. Then we understand that the competition period is probably going to be likely a 120-day window. The Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund funds are likely probably going to become available to the states and the other nonprofits probably late summer or early fall of 2024. That's just but there is a very important piece of that, is that in the Inflation Reduction Act, assuming it does not get cut in these debt ceiling discussions, all of this $27 billion needs to be out the door by the end of September of 24. So,
27 billion.
subject to interpretation. So some of the other funds that we have, and again, we've got a deck on our website on the climate bank provisions of il-fa.com. There's the grid, which we are working with municipal utilities and rural co-ops. That's transmission resilience, that's $40 million. We hope to have those later this year. The GRIP is competitive. That's hopefully going to be upwards of $100 million. That also aimed at rural co-ops and municipal utilities. That we hope will do the application on May the 19th. We hope that's later this year. We've got two revolving loan funds, one $10 to $20 million aimed at small businesses in partnership with private lenders called SSBCI, and then there is an energy efficiency fund that that's $15 million. We filed that a couple of weeks ago. On charging, I know that the city of Chicago is going to be pursuing its own application, but we are working on a statewide application called the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Funds. We expect to file that one on May the 30th. But that sort of gives you an idea of the alphabet and number soup that Larry and I and our colleagues are dealing with. Was that helpful?
Yeah, so that's just one follow-up question. So as it pertains to those various funds that are coming down the pipeline, I know you said there's a time frame for those. Are those funds that people can they start applying now, or the application process, or when can you kind of get in the queue to say, hey, we want to try to get some of these funds before it gets to the last minute?
Yeah, great question. Right now, it's incumbent upon the IFAs, the Climate Bank, and our other sister state agencies to identify the initial funding opportunity and get the paperwork in. That's the stage that we're in. I will also tell you that under the leadership of Kristen Richards at the Department of Commerce, and she's just brought in Hillary Scott Ogarinde, who was deeply involved with the CJA discussions in 21. She's the deputy director of all things CJA, and I know that just within the past few weeks, various funding opportunities at the state level through the Department of Commerce have come up, and notice of funding opportunities for some of the CJA funds that are aimed at businesses and the workforce hubs. So I think those are out on the street now.
Yeah, and I just follow up to that because I'll tie it back to the conversation this morning where both the EPA and DOE folks were like, hey, all this information's out there, but everybody doesn't know how to find it, so to speak, right? So this still falls into that same category. It's out there. Some of what Chris was describing in terms of the layering, all this is moving very quickly for everybody in government. So the government, all levels, has until the end of 2024 to push $27 billion into the economy. It's a lot of money, very fast.
Plus 27.
27 plus, okay. So I'm not saying we're, other states, okay, so Chris only mentioned 5 states. That means the other 45 states are not ready. We're ready. We're the best equipped state in the country to receive its allocation of the 27 billion plus, and it gets better for Illinoisans because the other 45 states who haven't gotten their act together, if they don't get their act together, we can get their money too. Okay, so we're trying to blow this out for the state of Illinois positively. So as it relates to applying for the funds, as it comes in, part of what happens is first, the state, that's literally the work that we're doing every day, is we're working with the DOE and others directly to make sure the state of Illinois is the best positioned state in the country to receive first dollars. As those dollars come in, we will have, and we have been having listening sessions and the like. We're working with our partners, such as the Urban League and Justice 4D and the CEJA Act, to make sure that the community knows that these are available. So right now, the best way to stay involved, that I would encourage you, are the Illinois Finance Authority, the Climate Bank board meetings are open to the public. They're open to the public.
9 to 30, the second Tuesday of every month.
I encourage you to go.
Virtual and in person?
Our last virtual is going to be a week from today at 9:30. Then I think what we'll do is we will figure out some sort of hybrid version to allow public comment thereafter. Oh, yes, sir.
I have a question regarding the informational sessions that you're having to prepare not only the general public, but organizations, BIPOC. There's gonna be a gap in capacity building as it relates to being able to not only apply for the funding, but also use it in retrospect of whatever grant they're applying for.
Correct.
So between the time that that 27 billion goes out the door to now, there's a gap in those businesses, those residents being able to apply for this funding.
Yeah.
So outside of course, doing your listening sessions with the Urban League and other community organizations, what are you guys doing to build that capacity so that residents, businesses are ready to, take over those funds?
Yeah, no, great question. So in that regard, recall again, the Climate Bank is a financial utility. So in terms of the bank's operations, yeah, we do have support of small farmers and farmer loans, for example, right? So in terms of the infrastructure for being able to work quickly with communities, community banks, making sure that they're working through kind of perhaps a due diligence aspect, they're doing the underwriting, but the funding that supports that you go to the bank to receive as a community or as a business, that funding support is not coming from the bank's balance sheet and the bank's resources, it's actually coming from the Climate Bank. And we could pass it through. So that is one mechanism, for example, to help close the capacity gap and the speed requirement.
And also, that was one of the advantages of the governor deciding to take an existing organization with a balance sheet and a board and with staff, because already we are having conversations as a result of the stakeholder engagement where people are saying, I have resource A and B, but I'm missing C. How do we fill in the gap at C? We can start to work on those types of gaps because we're already an existing organization. One of the examples, we've not yet closed one of these transactions, but one of the examples that we've identified with commercial projects is there are a lot of solar state and federal credits that are available, but they tend to dribble in over time. And so we are looking at ways to figure out how to solve those gaps, or if you've got an existing entity, apply one of our existing financial products, commercial property assessed clean energy financing, to help the business take full advantage of the credit, get the solar panels, reduce their utility costs, and then finance it. We're also, forming a bridge between the Housing Development Agency and the Illinois Power Agency, two entities that have not traditionally worked together, but given the $7 billion of the federal Solar for All under the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, we anticipate greater financial resources becoming available to low-income and disadvantaged communities. So that's a couple of the examples that one of the advantages of having an operating entity that's already active in this space is, we're
light years ahead of the rest of the country.
yeah.
And can I ask a follow-up? So I guess I can essentially say, so for example, I help represent about 50 minority-owned businesses in the South Loop and surrounding communities, small businesses that could take advantage of, say, the renewable energy, whether it be putting solar panels in their businesses or making it more efficient as it relates to their energy within their businesses. So, as an example, you're saying they can go to their regional bank, or you're working with their regional bank as an option, or
an organization like yours, we can sit down with you and your members now
okay.
and find out, okay, you're there, you know what your world looks like. What do you need?
Yeah,
Because-
for our constituents
For your
that are wanting.
constituents.
Yeah.
Yeah, for
Okay.
your members, because that becomes very useful, because as Larry knows with his long history in the financial services industry, there's no substitute for closing on a real live transaction. It's one thing to say, well, I'm going to develop X, and all of you should need X.
Right.
And then me walk into the room and say, X is the solution to your problems, and all of you say, well, I didn't really need X, I didn't ask for X, and what have you thought about Y? And that's the conversation. But again, to Larry's point, I can't, emphasize enough the importance that Governor Pritzker and the Illinois General Assembly did the hard work back in '21 with the CEJA state law and policy, whereas today, Minnesota has got legislation going through its process. New Mexico is doing something similar. Indiana is looking up, because these green banks come in a number of different flavors. There's state-based, and like Connecticut, that are really aimed at small businesses, and in statewide, very sophisticated, very established, very old, energy entity called NYSERDA. There's nonprofits called Michigan Saves in the state of Michigan, which really focuses on small contractors and low-income folks, and that's their sweet spot. And there's everything sort of in between. So it's rapidly evolving, but given the scale of these resources, we predict that 5 years from now, there is going to be a national structure providing financing in established terms, established products, that doesn't really exist today because it's so new.
Yeah, no, I agree. I just go one step further and say they'll probably model it on the state of Illinois, because it's really that good. But I'd also say this, I'll use this as a brainstorming session, right? Because, you know, I want to make sure that this is useful. But for example, in your question, I'm going to tie your question into it, if you will. So you get your 30 group together, identify your criteria and your needs. How do you want to do it? What are the benefits? How is it paid for? Put together a consortium. Find your installer, who's a reputable installer, who's done this. Put together a package. Come to us. Much better to be reactive than proactive when you're working with government, right? Be proactive. I need this, very specifically. The good thing about the state of Illinois is that the state of Illinois is very broad and flexible as it relates to climate finance. So Chris coined the term financial utility. It literally could not be a better term. Because within financing, there's really only 5 ways to finance anything. If anybody tells you there's something outside these 5, they're lying to you. There's equity. I write you a check, I get a piece. There's debt. I owe you. You'll pay me back later. There's equity-like debt, which means that it's equity, but I really don't want to take the risk. I want a preferred return. And if this thing goes bankrupt, I got my money out anyway. Then you have debt-like equity. And then you have what are called derivatives or contracts. You just write a contract. That's the 5th route. Come together, write a contract for your needs to a certain extent, and deliver it to the finance authority. And the finance authority is a financial utility that spits out standardized products to support those needs. So they may look at it and say, oh, this is really PACE financing for clean energy, assess, and then we'll go on to the bill, and there's a whole mechanism for that. So part of it, again, tying back to what Shalea was saying, right? Part of this is about education, about the programs that are available, and how to use them to make sure that this money flows into the BIPOC and rural communities. That's literally number 1. That's CEJA. Like I tell Chris all the time, like it was an amazing piece of legislation. And there's such alignment from the federal level to the state level to the local level about making sure that these benefits, because they are going to be spent. It's not like they're not going to be spent. Someone's going to figure out how to get them. That's our job. We got it. Now what we want to make sure is that they get into the community for the community benefit. Because there is a possibility, if it's not done correctly in our country, that entire segments of our society are going to be left behind. And that's what we have to do.
Yeah, thank you. I was being very patient, holding
No,
this
I-
on, so thank you guys. So, as somebody who worked on sort of, getting the CEJA legislation passed in different capacities in my career with different organizations, so I'm just speaking as a Chicagoan now, not on behalf of my organization. you know, some of the solutions that we can find as far as like, you know, an equitable energy transition may be able to be found in the financial products and services. However, historically, financial institutions have not been as equitable and fair.
Redlining,
There you go.
That's one.
yeah.
Redlining, adjustable mortgage, you
Yeah.
name it, right? So, given that, you know, also, in addition to that, so the institutions themselves, the structure of how to access the funds have not been equitable. We talk about capacity building, and that, there's some truth to that, but that puts a lot of the responsibilities back in the communities that have been injured already, and the people who've already, you know, suffered inequities. And again, I don't use low income, I don't use disadvantaged to identify those communities, because I'm from them, and that's not how we talk about ourselves in those communities. So I don't use that language. However, let's use equitable as a measuring tool. How has the reduction in the barriers become more equitable with regards to financial services, you know, lending in the clean energy space, especially here in Illinois, as you say, we're at the forefront of
So,
these conversations.
you wanna do it?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So, in short, it's not there yet, but you have certain policies and laws that are in alignment with that goal, which is a dramatic difference from 3 years ago. The emphasis on equitable outcomes that are written into that 900 pages of CJA, as you know, is without precedent in Illinois history, I believe. Similarly, the focus of the federal government on equitable outcomes that is coming along with these funds. Again, I've been working on this since September of 21, and I'm still waiting for federal $1 to, you know, for the Illinois Finance Authority to have access to it. On the flip side, this is going, for government, this is going like a rocket, because when Reid and his coalition went to the EPA people on the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act, they said, we're thinking about a new $27 billion national program to seed green and climate banks. How long do you think that would take, US EPA? And they said 7 years. And so instead, they wrote into the Inflation Reduction Act that it's got to be out the door between mid-February of 23 and the end of September of 24. And all of these opportunities that are coming out like rapid fire, I think that it's a great question. Where are the results and the equitable outcome? The short answer is probably not much at this point, yet the foundational infrastructure, just like the steel infrastructure on the building and the foundation, is there in both state law in Illinois and in federal law. How the floors, the electrical, the plumbing, the walls, the windows, the roof all gets built up on that steel structure and that foundation, that's our challenge. It's not there yet, but it is a big difference that CJA, IIJA, IRA are all in law today with these equitable priorities that are woven into the DNA of both of these sets of laws and policy.
I'll just follow up a little bit on that. So very specifically, one of the things that Chris said is that we cannot have this thing become red line 2. that's what the potential could be, right? It's a slippery slope, right? Because government can't do everything, so you have to rely on outside partners. And so where this hurts in terms of the community and lacking what we need in the community is that we don't have community banks anymore, right? So out of redlining, you get Seaway Bank. Well, Seaway Bank failed. So we need also to use this capital, right? It's an opportunity to then have someone start a bank focused on lending to make sure that the redlining doesn't happen. Right? That's a corporate issue. It's not a government function. That's a capitalist function. There's a place in the market for someone to start a business to help address and bring efficiency to the market. So what we need to do, and what Chris and I are focused on, as he said, with this alignment, is we have the hard challenge as well as, well, how do we make sure these benefits get there without falling into the redlining issues of the past, recognizing our history as a country, but also then not having the organizations necessarily that are mature enough to really help. So this is about building an ecosystem. It's about building businesses. It's about building businesses that understand community and understand the technology and understand these aspects because, again, this money has to flow, as Chris said. September 2024 is the end of the fiscal year for the federal government, and it's use it or lose it.
We have a question back here.
Okay, this will be the last one.
And just one other point on Larry's, part of the greenhouse gas reduction fund that came out in the April 19th guidance is part of that money, $6 billion, is going to be deployed in capital investment, capitalization chunks to small lenders, CDFIs, minority depository institutions. Again, $5 million is not a lot of money, but it's a combination of a grant up to $5 million and a technical assistance grant up to $700,000 or $800,000. So there is a recognition that we're going to have to seed things and seed them small. There was also a recognition that the federal government needed a handful of national nonprofits in order to get these $5.7 million chunks out to worthy recipients and then deal with the compliance. So that's one element that I think is part of it. And it's, again, it's written in the law.
Yeah, if we have to solve our problem.
My question should be fairly quick. So I work for the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign for a pre-college program. So we provide enrichment opportunities for middle and high school students. I work primarily with high school students in the STEM arena, everything. So I'm always looking for opportunities to educate our students and just build a curriculum, build a programming with exposing them to conversations like this early in where the job market is going. Are there any specific initiatives that are going on right now that are, helping to expose students to this information, educate them with that, and just wondering how I can partner with you all to do that?
We're happy to talk afterwards.
Thank you.
I have my U of I tie on.
Yeah.
And I'm an alum too.
Oh,
So am I.
I have so.
Well, that'll be it. So we have the same session later this afternoon. I don't know if you'll be able to be here for the afternoon session. I'll double check. But I think we're gonna go break for lunch, and then there'll be a plenary, and then we have the repeat of this.
Cut this. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.